going to go ahead and get started on our artist panel for today. So I'd like to bring up on stage Nick Fahey from Fahey Klein, who's going to be moderating the panel, Thalia Gochez, who's going to be one of the artists on the panel, Estevan Oriol, who's the other artist on the panel, and Kwaku Alston. Please come up.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Inglewood Photography Festival, and thank you guys for coming to this panel. Appreciate it.
Sure.
So one of the goals, I guess, for this festival, between all the founders, we spent a lot of time talking about what we wanted this festival to be, what we thought it could be, and what we thought it should be. And one of the goals of this festival has always been to kind of create a space where photography feels accessible, human, and connected into like a real cultural exchange. We wanted to create something where photographers, students, artists, and the public could come together not just to look at images, but to better understand the people and the experiences behind them. Today's conversation is really about that journey. All three of these artists have built deeply recognizable photographic voices, but what connects them to their work comes from authenticity. Their photographs are rooted in community, lived experience, curiosity, and trust. In very different ways, each of them has used photography to show people and worlds that might otherwise go unseen or misunderstood. This afternoon, we're going to talk less about the technical profession or career mythology, and more about how someone actually becomes a photographer, how you can find your voice, how your community shapes that voice, how you survive creatively, and what responsibility photographers have to the people and the cultures that they document. So Esteban, we'll start with you. You came up documenting a version of Los Angeles that most of the world wasn't seeing at the time. When did you realize that the world you grew up around and that you were documenting wanted to be seen by the rest of the world?
I would say maybe about 5 to 8 years after I started taking photos, and how it happened was I was a tour manager of Cypress Hill and House of Pain, so I was in charge of organizing all the interviews every day. So there was a thing called the fax machine back in those days. The record label would fax me the schedule of press, and so then I would have to schedule the day for the band. So it'd go like, we arrive to the venue, do the sound check, do press, do dinner, show, then leave after the breakdown. So they'd usually send me like 4 press things a day, and it was like 15 minutes at a time. And I would always notice the interviewer would take 10 minutes to talk, and basically take the photographer's time, talking. But I was like, okay, yeah, well, they have to get the story. And I was like, yeah, that poor guy, he has to get photos to fit that story in 5 minutes. And sometimes I'd have to cut them short. They're taking too long to set up. So I'd be like, hey man, sorry, we got to get the next guys are here. But I would tell the magazines, like, if you need any backstage photos or live shots, and you guys aren't gonna stay, I could, I have photos like that. And they're like, they would look at me like as a roadie, they're like, yeah, right, the roadie wants to give us his pictures, And I would show them, I had this little, kind of like a little portfolio that you get at the 1 hour photo. It was like a little photo album, and I'd show that to them. They're like, man, these are your pictures? I was like, yeah, if you want to use them, go ahead. And it started, one of them finally bid on it, and they're like, yeah, is it cool if we pay, like $500 for a usage fee? And I was like, yeah, sure. And I was going to give them the whole book, because like $500, I'll go make another one for 15, But they're like, no, just that one picture, and we'll give it back to you. We got to go do our thing. So after that, I learned the language, usage fee and this, that, and 3-month embargo and all that. So I started pitching my own photos from low riding and from LA when they were like, hey, do you have anything else? We could see it. I got low riding, I got street culture, gangsters, like downtown, because I was living in Skid Row back then. I have it all, pretty much everything that you can imagine of LA, I got it. And they're like, send it to us, let's see what you got. And they started taking it. And then that's when I realized, that I had something different than all my homies that were taking pictures on the road. Everybody's taking photos because we were traveling. So they all had the disposable cameras. So I would look at their pictures, I was like, oh, that's cool,
Did you ever feel like it was almost in terms of like a New York, Los Angeles thing, where they were sending out New York photographers maybe who didn't really understand what Los Angeles was about, and these stories were about Los Angeles, and you had the actual pictures of Los Angeles at those times?
Yeah, they do that now, 30 years later. I was telling my friend, he's a Chicano guy. The whole show is based on like Chicanos, it was a TV show, and I was like, hey homie, see if I can do the publicity shots for you. He goes, oh homie, I would, but they had this guy come from London, and he did the photos, and they didn't even like them, so they pulled stills out of the footage of the filming. And I was like, man, you could have saved that flight. It was probably business class, first class.
And had better pictures.
Hotels, food, and you would have got something you could use.
So Thalia, your images feel very intimate, natural, and almost like people are revealing themselves instead of performing. Was that always your approach?
Well, first, I want to say thank you for having me, and thank you. I'm just so honored to be alongside such legends, and I'm just humbled by it, so I just wanted to give space for that. Such a fan of you and such a fan of you. But yeah, I think my approach has always been to photograph people in their natural environment. I find that I always say the environment is like a model to me, is like a second talent. I'm testing light for the environment just as much as I'm testing light for the subject, because the subject, the talent that I have it's a reflection, that their environment is a reflection of them. And I've always wanted to go beyond a fashion-led visual and to create story. It's always been that formula for me. I think when I started, it was during like 2016, like during the Trump administration, and I was feeling a lot of rage, and because I felt like my community was getting targeted in a really ugly way. And to combat that change, I just decided to pick up the camera. I'm a self-taught photographer. I don't have no classical training, but I always been creative, and I've always explored that through fashion. And when I was exploring fashion, I saw just a lack of stories that I related to. So I decided to create my own stories with girls in my neighborhood, girls that looked like me, girls that, that I related to. But I wanted, like I said, I wanted to go beyond a fashion-led visual and to highlight their story. So a lot of times when I'm photographing models, I'm also having conversations on what environments they're connected to, what environments they love. Sometimes it's childhood homes, sometimes it's their grandma's home, sometimes it's the mercado, like a neighborhood store that they would frequent. And yeah, I found like my formula that really worked with me, and it felt that they felt most comfortable in those spaces, and the photos always like express that, because they feel safe. Yeah, as much safety as we can guarantee in a moment,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Kwaku, you photograph so many public figures, but your portraits still feel human and grounded. What did you learn early on about connecting with people in front of the camera?
It's a great question. And also, I'm honored to be up here with you too. This is great, and you as well. This is amazing, and thank you, Inglewood Photo Festival, for having us. I think for me, it really comes down to just being authentic and being myself and really just seeing myself. I always try to portray myself within the photographs, the people I photograph, basically, because I want to represent what I see. So that's kind of where I approach everything. When I meet someone for the first time, it could be a president, it could be someone on the street, it could be anyone. I just be myself and just go in there with joy and be happy, or whatever it is, try to feel their energy and work off that energy before I take a photograph. I used to just take photographs. I lived in Venice Beach. I moved from LA to Venice Beach, and I would just go riding my bike all the time, taking photographs of anyone I would see without asking. And when I was in college, the photojournalists would tell me, just take the photo first, ask questions later. Don't ask for permission. And then I started changing that philosophy when I lived in Venice, and I started asking people to photograph. Hey, can I take your photograph? I really want to make this beautiful portrait. And that changed the way I see photographing people. And that happened mid-career for me. So it's something that just happens.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's one of the things that young photographers don't realize is that it often comes from perspective. So it's having different interactions with people, seeing those reactions, and then recording those reactions and understanding, you know, I guess also there's a lot with intent, you know, and in terms of like, what are you trying to, you know, what is the success of an image, you know, or the success of a body of work? And I think that kind of goes back to, you know, with Estevan, with a lot of the stuff you're shooting, or shooting early on, you know, one thing that makes your work so important is that while the world, you know, had one version of Los Angeles, your images showed, you know, not another version of Los Angeles, but so many other different types of Los Angeles. And something you know, growing up, and, you know, my grandfather was born and raised here. You know, it's one of those things where whenever I talk about Los Angeles, I don't talk about one city. I talk about 200 cities that are all next to each other. You know, I think Eric Garcetti had a quote for a while, or one time where he said, you know, if you hate LA, drive 10 minutes in any direction. You're going to be in a whole other town. There's going to be a whole other type of person. There's going to be a whole other reason, and a whole other successful type of image. So I guess for Estevan, did you feel kind of a responsibility for documenting all these different cultures while you were in it, knowing that, you know, that version of, you know, this culture or that culture was, you know, kind of finite?
No, I was just winging it at that time, you know. I never thought about any reason or why I was taking pictures. I just did it. You know, I was like, my dad gave me a camera and he's like, hey, you're low riding and then you're doing this touring with this rap band, like you should take pictures. And I was like, yeah, maybe I should. And I started taking photos here and there. Like at first I was embarrassed to carry a big camera around because, you know, it just didn't fit my fit. And I was not really into it, you know. I would just take pictures. I'd have the camera in my car, and my friends were like, hey, get a picture of me and my ride. And I'm like, yeah, cool. Take a picture here and there. Then when we'd go on tour, I would take pictures of them, like by Eiffel Tower in Paris, or we'd go to Empire State Building, just do like tourist stuff, and take pictures of the band, and then backstage, and then when they were on stage, and everybody we were on tour with. So I was just kind of just taking shots here and there. You look at one roll, and like 5 of the shots are low riding in LA. A couple of them are like family shots. A couple of them are on tour. Like my earlier rolls were all kinds of stuff.
When did it go from friends being like, hey, get your camera and get this, to you being like, hey, get together and let me get this?
I would say in the late 90s is when that started. When I started noticing, I used to print at a place called Focus Photo Lab. The girl there, Lisa, told me, she goes, hey, do you mind, what do you do with your pictures? Because I would always develop them, and I had a 1984 Oldsmobile Cutlass, and I had a milk crate in the back, and I used to just put the envelopes in the milk crate. She goes, what do you do with all your photos? And I go, I just put them in my trunk. And she goes, you carry them around in your trunk? I was like, I mean, yeah, I have a milk crate in there. Like, I don't know what to do with them, you know? And she goes, well, put them in your house, you know? Like, don't carry them around in your trunk. It gets hot and you're going to mess them up. And then she said, can I print some for you? And I go, yeah, for what? And she goes, well, I want to print them in my lobby of my photo lab and try to sell them. And she did that. She printed 11 of them, and 8 of them sold. And she's like, out of all the photographers, she used to have Helmut Newton and all these other big guys going in there. Of all the photographers of celebrities I have shown in my lobby, your photos sold the most. And your photos are just everyday people, which is, it kind of showed me something. That's what she said, you know?
But also the people coming in there are photographers. You know,
Yeah.
so I think that's something also really important and special is it's other craftsmen and craftspeople coming in and acknowledging and saying, hey, I want that. You know, and they're doing the exact same thing every day.
Yeah, one of the crazy things like that happens in this business is the guy that bought 2 or 3 of those photos in the early 90s ended up working at Meta, and he's hired me 30 years later. He's like, hey man, I'm doing this thing on Lowride, and you wanna do the photos? I was like, yeah, you know, why wouldn't I?
But I think going back to kind of what we were talking about at the beginning of this, of, you know, what is that transition to be a photographer, to get to this level, to have this thing? It's a lot of little steps, you know, and in that sense of, you know, had this woman been like, hey, can I put some pictures up? And you're like, no, you know, 30 years later, you wouldn't have had that thing that happened, that thing, and happened to that thing, you know, and I think that it's just that it, you know, but at the same time, it's also important to realize that being a photographer is being an entrepreneur. You know, and so you guys are businesses, and so it's that thing of you got to try the business out. You got to try any business opportunity that you can get, any exposure, you know, authentically. But you know, I guess it's having that, you know, confidence in a lot of things. So you know, going over to Thalia, you know, there's a lot of confidence in your images, but they don't feel forced. And I guess that you talked a little bit about this, but could you talk more about, you know, kind of how you work with your environment and the people that you're comfortable with themselves to be themselves? It seems like a lot of these images are collaborative.
Yeah, I deeply believe that being a good photographer kind of coincides with being a good person. That's something that I practice. I really do. A lot of like the pre-production that happens before a shoot is me just building a friendship and trust with the person I'm photographing. Really like knowing when to put the camera down and knowing when to pick it up. It's like essential to creating an environment where ultimately the person trusts you. So if it's really just building a friendship with this person, and the photos always reflect that. It's not something you can't find. I always say you can't find intimacy in Photoshop. You can't find that level of trust in Photoshop. That's something that you have to actively work on and be a good person and like try to like make an environment where people feel comfortable around you. I didn't realize I was creating that until later on in my career, and people were saying that to me, you know, where they're like, even if, you know, the model's turned around, you know, she's always looking at you. Her eyes are always looking at you. And to me, it's like a form of trust. And I really value that. And that's like everything to me. You know, if I always say the photos are a bonus. You know, if I don't leave with like some sort of friendship and connection, like this is like a form of healing for me, then I don't really want to do this craft, you know?
Wow, yeah, that's great. I think Kwaku, I think it's, you know, you're someone that a lot of photographers deeply respect. Not just because of your images, but the way that you kind of support the community of photographers. Can you talk about, you know, I mean, there's this collaboration, you know, between model and photographer, but also I think it's really important in the sense of, you know, the mentorship of photographer to photographer and helping, you know, young photographers kind of understand how to move within the system.
I appreciate that. I didn't set out to do that. It just happened. It really does come back to community. I went to photo school, so you learn a lot when you're first going to Rochester Institute of Technology. And my best friends are still my friends that I was in the darkroom with at 12 o'clock at night, developing film and doing things. So they're still in my life. But it really does come back to community and having like photographers need to talk to photographers. Because like you said, usage rights. There's all these different things that we need to know as entrepreneurs, as being business people, that I had to learn from making mistakes. I had like just came into my head. I was like the first person in the United States to photograph the Spice Girls, if you guys remember that. And I signed a contract saying I could never sell those photographs. And that, because my agent didn't understand either. And it was beginning, I was 22 years old. And then they became huge. And I don't have the rights to those photographs because I didn't have other photographers back then who could say, hey, do this, or agents or managers. So the community is so important for us to all come together and talk, because we don't talk as much because we're in these little silos by ourselves taking photographs because you're in a little box composing, but there's a huge business behind this that we have to respect, because there's a lot of money in the archives. And if you look at these great photographers out there, like right now there's a resurgence I'm seeing over Instagram with Abaddon. And Abaddon was, I interviewed Abaddon's studio. I had his print in my hand and I didn't pass the test because I was terrible at spot zoning. And my friend got the job, Jonathan Mannion, and he's an incredible photographer too. But you have to really respect the business, because if you don't respect it, you're not going to survive in it. And the only reason I'm here 30 years later is because I just keep going. And I love photography. I love meeting photographers. I love just image making. And there's something about it that excites me. When I see your work and I see your work, I can feel it. And I think that's what brings us together.
And something that I talk to a lot of young photographers or emerging mid-career photographers, and I talk a lot about knowing kind of what you are and what you sell. You know, and I think that's another really important part about having a community of photographers, is for them to be able to look at you and say, hey, you take this type of portrait really well, you don't take that type of portrait really well. And if you're gonna build a business around doing this, because this is who you are, and this is authentically who you are, and who you can be without even having to worry about it, as opposed to trying to be another version of a photographer. And that's something I think about all the time, of, photographers needing to understand really who they are, to understand how they can work and operate within the world.
I think that's a very good point, but it's very difficult to figure out as a young photographer who you are, what your voice is, what the narrative you're trying to tell. And my only advice to anyone who's stuck and is unsure is to keep shooting. You have to shoot every day. It's like your dailies. You're doing it because you have to keep seeing and keep re-envisioning. And that's the only way you're going to improve. And then you start seeing patterns within your work.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of people talk about that tension between, making the work you believe in and making work that pays. And I think it's always about doing both, right? It's always about taking that assignment and creating the authentic version of it. You've balanced commercial success while still maintaining a very strong point of view. I mean, was there ever pressure to become a different type of photographer or have a different type of style?
I wanted to be a fashion photographer. I moved to New York, that was my dream. I tried to assist certain fashion photographers, Arthur Elgort, all these different people. And I ended up working for Mark Baptiste. And he let me into his studio, and that's kind of how it started. But fashion was really hard in the early 90s to break into. And I did get into certain magazines, and I had this huge fashion story that I had an 8-page for a magazine called Marabella. It was like my big break, and then the magazine folded. So my story never came out. And hip hop was so big, like Cypress Hill and all these different bands. And so I kind of gravitated towards Vibe magazine and paper and those kind of things. And urban culture embraced me, and I kind of did that. And that kind of got me in the scene and gave me a little bit of coin in my pocket to pay the bills. And then I had to break through that to go into celebrity, so I moved out here. And you always have to keep pushing yourself, because they will box you in they'll put you in a box because you're a product. Yes. So you have to keep reinventing yourself. And the only way to do that is by taking pictures and keep pushing. Go somewhere, get outside yourself. I went to, I don't shoot Chicano culture and everything, but I lived in Venice, and they were my next door neighbors. So I started picking up cameras and taking pictures of them just because it's part of my environment. And you have to challenge yourself and get outside your comfort zone. But I still have dreams of being a fashion photographer.
But I think it's important also in the sense of, there's getting out of your box, but I would almost say it's like make the box bigger. Yes. Right? Yes, because true. For me, when I'm looking at selling fine art pictures, I like to see new projects, new things happening, new work coming out, but I want it to be different. but I want to be able to look at that picture and say, oh, that's Estevan's picture. It's something completely different, but I still know who that photographer is. And you know, I guess that brings me back to you, Estevan. When you started reaching this global audience, did it change the relationship with the cultures and the communities that you were documenting back in Los Angeles?
I think it was a little more like when nobody knew who I was or was doing those, you know, photos and stuff. People were like way more easy to do it. They're like, yeah, whatever, take a picture. But then it was like, oh, it's him. I wonder, is he gonna put in a movie or a book, or you know, how much am I gonna make or whatever. You know, it's like, it gets into that thing because you know we're in LA. So it kind of became more difficult, you know, to approach people to shoot because they always thought like, especially after I did a thing with Netflix, everybody thinks I have millions.
Yeah, totally, I'm sure.
If I told you guys how much, you know, I really got paid, you guys would be like, you're a sucker.
No, but I mean, yesterday in your talk, you were showing a lot of travel photography and going places. And so is it, you know, refreshing for you in that sense where you can go to places like Afghanistan or Thailand and maybe people aren't as familiar with you, you know, and you can kind of have that, you know, one-on-one relationship where people are just being themselves again?
Yeah, I love it. I love going to new places where nobody knows anything about me, and they just are like, yeah, whatever, man. But how all that happened was I was going on tour for 13 years with the bands, and then when that job stopped because they were tired of touring since 91 to 2005, they were burnt out. They're like, hey, we're gonna take a break, and I was like, well, that's cool. You know, you guys get residuals and you make a lot of money. I don't, so I got to do something. So what I had in my bag was I could be a photographer, director, video director, because I was already doing it. And I just went head first into that, and it started working. And from tour managing, I knew how much people were getting because all the budgets would come to me. So I was like, okay, $25,000 for an album cover, $35,000, and then I was looking at and I was like, man, if I just did like just one album cover a month, I'll be cool, you know. Yeah. But it's not as easy as it sounds, you know. You gotta convince like record labels that you can handle that, you know. Like if they give you $25 grand, what are you gonna do with that money? And I don't know if it was maybe the way I looked or whatever, but people weren't just handing me, you know, $25,000 checks just because I asked for it, you know. Sure. So it took a little while to break down that door, and I ended up getting a photo agent it was called the Visage. It was on Sunset. It was the one that like Herb Ritz and all them had, but I was like the lowest level. I hadn't worked yet, and I was somebody for them to try to develop. And they started going like, what do you want to shoot? And I was like, I just want to shoot, you know, magazines, campaigns, whatever. And I started shooting. I was already kind of working, doing editorial for hip-hop magazines and album covers, but I was like, hey, what about like celebrities and stuff? They're like, oh, you'd want to shoot that? You know, I thought you just want to shoot lowriders. And I was like, no, I want to shoot it all. Like, I wanted to shoot fashion and stuff like that because that's where the real budgets were, you know? There's decent money in shooting some hip-hop album covers. There's no money shooting lowriders or just people in the street. You know, nobody's paying for that in magazines. It's like, fashion to me is like the number one.
And now no one's even paying for magazines.
Yeah, there's no magazines.
Instagram.
Yeah, well, and I guess that brings, you know, Thalia, you're kind of in this, you know, world of, it's a different form of currency, right? You know, it's like your currency is almost likes and, you know, kind of like social, you know, value, I guess, in a lot of ways. A lot of younger photographers feel pressure to chase these kind of online trends. to kind of get those likes and get that notice. But for you, how do you stay connected to your own instinct kind of outside of that noise? I mean, it's hard, obviously, to create outside of the internet, but you have something that feels authentic. So how are you kind of continuing on that line?
Yeah, I don't think I get lost in that sauce, like, at all. Like, I feel like I just stay true to who I am and my creativity. It's just deeply a part of me. And I feel like anytime I share any work and it gets like a positive response, that's really cool. But I don't get hung up on the likes and repost and share. I just genuinely don't. I go on Instagram and I post and then I like exit out. I don't find inspiration on the explore page. Like, I find inspiration in my neighborhood. I find inspiration the guy at the bus stop and what he's wearing and how he's posed up. I find inspiration from the lady at the mercado and how she has her hair. Like, I find inspiration in my community. I don't really, like, there's not a lot for me. Like, I don't even have a website. Like, I'm just like...
No, I know, I tried to find it, yeah.
Which I should change. I need to, like, not do that. But, yeah,
But I guess that's the thing. Like, what's your value metric?
So I think I've just stayed true. Like, okay, so when I've worked in, like, commercial... So the real money is commercial shoes. Like, let's talk about that. Like, because fashion don't have money anymore. Like, I don't get a lot of money in fashion. Like,
yeah.
I get my bags from commercial work, and that helps me do the fun stuff. I'm sure everyone knows that, But yeah. Anywho, what was your question?
What like when you're doing the fun stuff, back in the day, it was like, you're like, cool, I'm pitching this job, I'm getting this budget, and I'm getting this whole kind of a thing. For you, obviously it's the same thing of getting the budget and getting the job, but I guess I'm more interested in the fun stuff of, how is that an image? Because it's also, for your stuff, the fun stuff is driving the commercial stuff, right? That's where you're getting the audience, that's where you're getting noticed. And so is there kind of a value exchange where you can see or feel that an image is valuable when you're doing it on the fun stuff side, not on the commercial side?
Okay, so if I'm understanding the question, I feel like there's no difference between my commercial work and my personal work.
Yeah.
I feel like it's very, like, there's a clean thread between the two. So that, like, if I do get, asked to do some sort of commercial work, it's usually the clients coming with a very specific creative direction that's already aligned with who I am as an artist. So there's very few, like, adjustments or things I need to change about myself, which is I'm very blessed about,
Yeah. And what was, when was that path possible? Like, how did that happen for you, I guess, is another way to say it.
Absolutely, yeah.
To where you were able to convert making amazing images that you felt were successful to all of a sudden seeing bags.
Yeah, I like how you said that, seeing bags. I think, when did I first see a bag? No, I'm just kidding. So the first year of shooting, I was just shooting on a cheap little point and shoot, like my Minolta. Like I said, I'm not, I didn't really know much about anything. But I was shooting, like you said, every chance I could, like in between class, in between, like, my two jobs, on weekends. I was babysitting at the time. I was just doing anything I could to get a little money, right? But I started to develop my own, style, and it wasn't until maybe a few months later, I got an email from a creative agency that was like, hey, we're really interested in you. And I've said this story before, but really interested in you. We have a client, a globally known, culturally relevant client that is interested in utilizing your photography services. Like, please sign this NDA. Up until this point, I didn't know any industry language. I didn't even know what an NDA was. I had to Google that. I had to chat that, because I didn't know what that was. And it was just very humbling for me. It was also very scary. The client ended up being Nike, and I was shooting they wanted me to shoot a global campaign for Air Force One. And it was all unsung heroes. That was my first high paid job, and I shot that with the cheap point and shoot. The side of the battery was broken, and I know, isn't that crazy? It was $1 too. It was. I got it from the Bulga, the flea market. It's crazy. But even the battery back was I taped yeah, it was so bad. But I had cameras second bodies, but I remember I felt really embarrassed and I felt really ashamed because I felt not good enough to be there. And I remember I call her my mentor now, but she told me, she was like, you show up with that camera, with the tape around, because they wanted you for your vision, not for the camera. And I really needed to hear that at the time because it was really hard for me. But anywho, ever since that job, it kind of pushed me into the industry, and that job led to another job. And yeah, it's just really cool now, because now I feel like a lot of the creative briefs that I get from different high-level clients, they feel like it feels like me. It doesn't feel like I need to change who I am as an artist, which I'm sure is a blessing, yeah.
I think Kwaku, you work with so many young photographers, I'm sure it's great for you hearing this experience and this story. What do you think emerging artists misunderstand about building a career?
That's a good question. It takes time. And, someone once told me when I lived in New York, when I moved to New York, overnight success in New York City is 3 to 5 years. Because when you think about it, if you're doing editorial, and you might say you work for a huge magazine, an A-level magazine, and you shoot it, that work does not come out for 3 months later. So what are you doing for those next 3 months? Trying to find the next job. So then you might get another job. So you might get 3 jobs within 2 or 3 months, and that might be a whole year worth of editorial. So when you think about it, overnight success does take time. So my advice to young photographers is don't put so much pressure on yourself to be a star right away. Instagram and all that, it's a lot of pressure. Like you, I can't stand Instagram. I love it. It's a love-hate relationship. I do find inspiration every now and then in it. But it really does come down to take your time, patience, and it will happen. Just keep doing it and making good images and showing it to people. But yeah, I guess I kind of forgot what the question was.
No, it's good. You did good.
That was fire. That was fire.
Yeah. Estevan, when you look back on the impact that you've had on young photographers, what does that mean to you? To see this whole new generation of photographers coming through, knowing they looked at your images and seeing your success and wanting to replicate that.
I think it's great. We do these shows where there's like 100 photographers. And it looks like, like I've been teaching a class, and at the end I was like, okay guys, we're gonna put it up on the wall today, but I haven't, It's just me shooting every day and getting it out there and then seeing it and then wanting to do stuff like that. And after I just see the whole wall, I'm like, like this is amazing, like these guys they're getting it in, they're doing their thing. But at the same time, I'm thinking like, oh, okay, I'm doing a show with 100 people that are shooting all photos like me. Like I gotta be on my toes. They're coming for me, They're coming for my spot. So I gotta, stay focused and keep doing it. Like back in the day, you could be cool and be like, I'm gonna go underground and I'm just gonna go dip and do this project. I'm not gonna tell nobody. Nobody's gonna know where I am. I'm gonna come back and smash. Like, you go underground now and disappear for 2 years, you're gone. It's over. Like, forget about you, That's how it feels like here. It feels like in Europe, if you were in Europe and you wanted to do that, I think it could still fly. But as far as here, if you get out of the game for a second, like, that, I think there's 10 to 100 people wanting to slide into your spot and you're asked out.
I almost feel like in a different way, coming from the fine art sense, I almost need a little bit of space, when people release a new body of work to be able to sell through that. And so this is something that I'm battling with on the fine art side of battling social media too, right? That constant relevance. But at the end of the day, there's only so many people with so much money buying so many pictures. Yeah. You can't increase that pool. So it's that thing. But also I think, something that I think about a lot is that, humans have been communicating with images and symbols on walls longer than the languages we speak today. To see an image, have an emotion that, creates thought is amazing, but really you've created a visual language, so when you see 100 of these photographers, it's interesting. You're like, I got to be on my game. You're still participating. But I think a lot of people in here like see it another way of, it's a whole, it's a form of poetry or any other kind of, conversation, and you were one of the early parts of that conversation, and now that's a conversation that's going to go on for a long time, which I think is important. And if there was a young photographer sitting in the room questioning whether or not they belonged in this field, what do you think would be a good thing for them to kind of hear, in terms of, figuring out their own authentic voice?
I'm not too sure. Just like a hobbyist photographer, like, all you could do is tell them, shoot what you love and have fun and shoot as much of it as you can. But for the person that wants a career out of it, just like, I would say, look at people who are successful and try to talk to them and maybe ask them questions like, hey, what do you suggest I do in like this situation? Like, for me, when somebody calls up, I just figured out what BA means a year ago. Somebody's like, yeah, I want to bring on my BA on the phone. And I'm like, BA, what's that? And I hit it up real quick. It says business affairs. I was like, oh yeah, I got my BA too. I want to put my BA on the line too.
I was like, what is that?
So, there's these words that people try to trip you up, because if you're, they're like, oh, this is just a dummy, like, we'll ride over him, no problem. So they try to do that to you every single time. And I learned a word called perpetuity, maybe, 10, 15 years ago. And that's like the worst word I've ever heard in my life.
Facts.
Worst word for a photographer, yeah.
It means forever. So they say like, yeah, we have the rights to your photographs in perpetuity, blah, blah, blah. And one of the best things that I have on my team is a lawyer, my business affairs guy, because all that stuff looks like a foreign language to me. And I just pass it to him, pay him, his fee, and I usually come out with 3 times more than I wanted for the fee, and then I get all the rights that I wanted and then some. So I didn't know that in the first 20 years.
But I think it's also, it's for everybody, right? It's like you guys all have teams. You've got your lawyers, you've got your BA guys, you've got people you pull in for stuff. And I think that's another thing a lot of younger photographers don't realize is how integral those teams are to who you guys are, what your look is, and what your voice is.
I think team building when you're young is the most important thing. When I graduated college, I had my first job and I had to hire an assistant, and I didn't know anyone in New York to hire, so I hired my classmates. They were my assistants for the first few years of when people were all young photographers. So building your team starts when you start. So it could be whoever is your first assistant, and it gets bigger and bigger, where you have agents and you'll have like lawyers and you name it, intellectual property attorneys. It keeps growing because your photography is intellectual property, it's IP. I guess the most important piece of advice I can give you for young photographers, I was told this when I was 23. I was at a party, my first big Christmas party. I was at New York Times Magazine, and this photographer came up to me, and she was a credible documentary photographer, Donna Ferrata, I think I'm pronouncing her name, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correct, Donna Ferrata. And she said to me, "You're the young one." And I'm looking at her, I'm by myself in the corner, and I'm like, "What are you talking about?" She goes, "You're the young new photographer." And she goes, "Your career is gonna go like this. It's gonna go up, all the way at the top, and then it's gonna go down. And it's gonna go back up. But when you're going up, you better save that money that you're at the top. Because when you're going down, you're gonna need that money to rebuild your career." And that was the best piece of advice I've ever given. And I still say it to my assistants today, because you make whatever amount you make in one day or a year, you need that money to reinvent yourself, because it takes time to reinvent yourself, because you need life experience. And the problem with Instagram and social media and all that stuff is that we forget that we're human beings. And sometimes going through trauma, going through certain things helps your creative vision as an artist. And that happens with time. And time doesn't happen in one day, in one post. So,
yeah, no, absolutely. Thalia, what are you looking for when you're building your team?
Women? Just kidding.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. They're like, men are like, I'm just kidding. But honestly, it's facts. Like, women of color, like, all my team are women of color. Like, my light tech, I've worked with her for over 5 years now. I don't even need her name's Ash. I don't even need to communicate with her. Like, she knows, she's like, soft diffuse. Like, she already knows what I like. There's very little, like, light design that we need to discuss unless it's, like, deeply, different. But yeah, and also she, like, advocates for me in a lot of ways too. Because I don't have an agent. That's been, like, an intentional route that I've taken. I just like all of that percent. I'm just kidding. Sorry. But no, I have explored agents as well. I just don't feel like anything has truly aligned for me. But as far as the team goes, yeah, like light technician, photo assistants, digitechs, they're all women. They're all people that I've worked with for years now, and that know me, and I feel supported by them. And yeah, I think what I look for also too is like not just about women, but like hard workers, like people that a lot of people don't like to work hard. Like, it's just a hard thing to come by, honestly. And I work really hard. I put my heart on the floor every photo shoot. I'm depleted in the most beautiful way, and I just want the people around me to also feel that. And I know that sometimes that's not sustainable, but it's just the industry that I'm in, and yeah. But I also want to say that, like, I feel like there is a lot of photographers that are deeply inspired by you, but no one can ever be you. You have your own sauce and just beauty, and I know you know that, but I'm just so, like, and you as well. I just feel like it's so important to say that, because you're like legendary, and I appreciate you.
Thank you guys so much. I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you, everybody. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you guys for coming to the Inglewood Photography Festival, and I hope to see you guys all again and again. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.